Yeah, so we all have different questions. I think we all have one or two questions we want to ask you and pick your brain over the next hour. I think we'll start off with the first question, which is about Palantir, because this is a Palantir weekly podcast. You mentioned you haven't had a position, but you've done a reaction to me and Sean for an hour, by the way. You did an hour-long reaction of us talking about it, and that didn't pull the trigger. Then you reacted to Sachin going all in. That didn't pull the trigger. So I guess we're curious. The stock is growing. There's a ton of community around it. There's a whole new publication launched around this company. What is it going to take for you to pull the trigger on the stock? And what are your thoughts on sort of the long-term potential of investing in Palantir?
Yeah.
No pressure, though.
Yeah. So I think the biggest factor on why I haven't been able to pull the trigger yet and make a big position in Palantir or any position for that matter is when I look at this company, I can't see it in the real world necessarily, right? I have to kind of trust other people's opinion, and I know you did a great interview, obviously, of folks that are very knowledgeable in the industry, right? And so for me, I'm listening to these, and it's so darn exciting, but at the same time, I can't see it in the real world. And so if I go back to, let's say, Tesla, for example, right? I was starting to see more and more Teslas on the road in 2018. I was starting to see the Model 3, like actually in real life, and I was like, dang, man, and there's more of these Teslas. And so there's just that last kind of great feeling when you can see it in the real world. And I think that's the hardest thing for me with Palantir is I feel like if you run a big company, you have to consider using Palantir over the coming years. That doesn't mean you're going to 100% use it, but you have to consider it. But with that being said, it's tough when you aren't in the trenches like that. I don't work for a big company, obviously. And so that's the toughest thing for me with Palantir. And also, I don't know anybody that works for Palantir. Whereas, I know folks that work at Google, Tesla, NVIDIA, Apple, those sorts of companies, but I don't know anybody that works at Palantir. So I don't have an in, and I can't see it in the real world. I think that's the one last thing that's just, would push me over the edge if I could just see it a little more in the real world.
Sean, your thoughts on that?
I think it's a great call out. And, so speaking both from the side of an operator, I work day in, day out in that industry. I compete with Palantir on a regular basis. I smoke them, but that's neither here nor there. So like for those of us who work in and around that deep learning space, the ETL space, the data aggregation space, when you live it, you breathe it, you see the value of it, you understand the multiples. But I think, Jeremy, what you just shared is something that I think people really need to listen to is there's a reason why PE and VC go so heavy in B2B tech, but retail loves B2C because they can see it, they can feel it. I can download an app on my phone. I can buy a phone and put it in my pocket. I can see a new TV. I can see whatever. This is where a lot of times people miss the boat early, or they misunderstand. They don't understand the metrics, the KPIs, or how to read a 10K from that kind of a play. So I think I love what you're saying here. I think it's a good call out because there is something so complex with this idea of aggregating complex data from complex systems into decomplexed outputs. But saying it's like, what the hell does that even mean, right? So we use words like AI, machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, and it's mumbo jumbo, it's spaghetti on the wall. But if I say, hey, 10 million iPhones just got sold, or 30,000 new Teslas hit the street, it's like I can feel it, I can see it. And to your point, Tesla next door, Tesla next door. It doesn't take much for me to see it. Everyone's got an iPhone in their pocket, so I think it's a great call, and it also causes a lot of. And to the rest of the guys here, to everyone watching this, I would say too, it's really interesting why you see sort of these kind of like tech sort of fanatic communities build up. It's because the people who live with it and breathe every day, myself, Sachin, Kris, we're in the weeds. I mean, I spend my entire day talking to executives of major companies about why they need deep data-driven strategies to operationalize intelligence. And you say that to someone in the street of why they should buy a stock that's at $11 when it used to be 20, and they're like, well, you're crazy, you don't get it, right? And it's because they don't see the connections, the ecosystem that we're adding trillions of data points a millisecond, right? And gigawatts of data. So it's a great call. I think it's really fair. And it's also why tech tends to have a bit of a lag where retail loves that B2C feel, something you put their hands on. So yeah, great point. I love it. And I think it's well pointed out there as well.
Yeah, and I would love to get more takes on that. I think it's a really big subject we're on right now because I always think about it in terms of if this company has a troubling quarter or two, am I going to be likely to sell it, right? And so if I think about a Palantir, let's say Palantir has an off quarter for whatever reason, right? And they grow 12%. Oh my gosh, when we expect them to grow 30%, let's say.
Yep.
Oh boy. And then I don't have an in the industry, and I'm like, what's wrong with Palantir? And I remember, I think it was Q1 of 2019, if I recall. Tesla put up this horrible quarter. It was a garbage quarter. I think on a sequential basis, revenue was down multi-billion dollars. And that was when the stock pretty much sold off the heaviest. And a lot of people flooded out of that stock that were even retail. They're like, I'm done with this, right? The company's not growing. They're like, it has no demand. The only reason I was able to stay is just because I had so much conviction. I'm like, I see it in the real world. I'm like, I know people are going to come and buy these. Like, I don't believe this. And so I think about that in terms of Palantir. And I'm like, shoot, if this company had a troubling quarter, am I going to be able to hold through in that situation? So I think it's a really big subject, and especially for the retail crowd, especially. So
yeah, great call. Great call.
Sachin, your thoughts on that? Or sorry, Kris, go. You go, Kris. Go ahead.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I wanted to just say is that if you work in the corporate industry, and you're absolutely right, a lot of retail people won't see it. And even among like corporate people, we don't see it until like literally it's like the biggest thing. Like an example is about 12 years ago, that's when we all started to work with Salesforce, but we never thought Salesforce would grow into the monster that it ended up becoming, And the thing is, if you look at it, it's got consistent growth over years, And so a lot of companies right now, when you're looking at it, even people in the industry don't necessarily see the value in it. And that's why if you look at a lot of institutional investors, they're not 100% jumping on Palantir either, because the technology is so, and I hate the term that everyone uses, like Palantir is very black box, like, it's like a jumble of things. And that's why one of the great things that we're trying to do with this community is bring more light and shine it to that black box. And that's where people like CoachStrap are helping us, where they're actually building relationships with Palantir and saying, look, this is what you guys don't really necessarily see as a retail investor, but these are like the really cool foundational things that are going to be building out the big data OS in the next 10 years, So I would say this, like, look at the growth trajectory of companies like CRM, see what made them very popular, and see how many companies are adopting it. One of the great things that we're doing on Twitter, in our little Twitter community that we have, is that we're literally posting all the partnerships that Palantir is signing. And it's crazy to see, because right now Cam is probably running out of space on his wall of companies that Palantir is signing, which is good.
And that's finding job descriptions with Palantir. Like we found Roblox yesterday, and it's just like it's a ton of them.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. Like whenever we look at like LinkedIn, we look at Indeed, we're just seeing all over the place people say need Palantir Foundry experience, need Palantir Foundry experience. Like I'm even looking on job boards in India because they outsource so much like back end work to India. So like right now, there's a lot of companies that actually require Palantir Foundry experience in India. Who's like that's crazy because. And maybe Sean can speak to this a little later, but what happens is a lot of like the back end work is actually like sent over to India. So it's almost like the skunt work of the IT world, but that's what Indians are really good for. They got low cost workers there who are experts in some of this stuff, and they have so many engineers. So I think even there I'm seeing like a tremendous amount of growth. So it just goes to show you that Palantir, because it's like literally partnering with everyone and its mother, that there's something there. And that's the same thing I saw with Salesforce. And I really wish I had pulled the trigger back then, because to me, Salesforce just looked like a weird application that, I use that at my work, but it didn't really do much else, right? Now it's $200-300 billion company. So it's crazy. And I think the same thing could happen to Palantir too. So that's why I'm in it,
I love that comp and giving a Salesforce comp there. And I think that's a great point. And I think that's one of the other reasons I've been a little bit interested in Palantir is for the mere fact that you do see all these big companies using Palantir now, and it's like, they're not doing Palantir any favors. They're doing that because Palantir has the stuff they want, right? And so I think that's a huge, like when other big tech companies want to use Palantir, I think it's a great vote of confidence. So I definitely respect that. Now, if you don't mind, I just would love to hear from you guys. Who do you think Salesforce, in terms of like a previous company that came on the come up, do you think Salesforce is the closest comp, or do you view it as anything else, or do you feel Palantir is so different that there's nothing you can even comp it to?
Let's have Sachin go first on this because he didn't get a word out yet, and then we'll go to Sean. Go ahead, Sachin.
Okay, so So the answer is implicit. There is one axis where Salesforce has comparative, because Salesforce is very much B2B in that respect. But if you see, like, Salesforce solve one problem end to end. Salesforce is not solving the whole enterprise system. So, for example, if you want to see like what happens in an enterprise OS, there are several layers. You have operating technologies, you have legacy system where SAP is there, you have edge processing infrastructure, your cloud, your data layers, you have API, DevOps, CI/CD, you have application layers. Palantir is going across these layers. Now, Salesforce is expanding within that layer horizontally as fast and as best as possible. And the reason for that is that when you go across all these layers, first you need to be good in tech. The second is that the change management requirement is very high. I mean, people working in large organizations, they don't like change. So when a company like Palantir comes and you are changing too many things, people have a natural repulsion. And you saw that what Alex discussed in the recent call, that their move made IT very adversarial about them, because they were talking to the senior guys and senior guys were telling IT, you need to do this. These people don't challenge their senior management, but they create a lot of passive aggressiveness. I think the way to look at it is, because see, one of the challenge everyone has, including like you mentioned, is that you cannot have this touch and feel for Palantir. Okay, and if you see the companies which are $1 trillion club nowadays, I mean, they are mostly, if you see, I mean, they are B2C companies. But if you look deep under these B2C companies, for example, AWS, you will see that AWS revenue is actually growing much faster in B2B segment. Same thing is happening in Google, and same thing is happening in Microsoft. So it is first sign that the B2B segment is actually going to grow much faster, because first it started late compared to B2C. Okay, the industries were kind of like laid back, and governments were laid back, but now everybody is coming up. And the value proposition is far different here, because like, for example, in any industry, 60 to 80% of the money in the working capital is actually tied up in their supply chain. So if you save supply chain in terms of timing and inventory, even by 5 to 10%, because it's sequential and because you flip the asset fast, the overall gain in your working capital requirement in the whole year is like 40% to 60% at times. So now they are, because they can visualize it, they can see it. It's no longer like this, that I have 5 choices and I will make. Now you can actually see that these 5 choices open 20 choices for you. Now you see those 20 choices before you make. So it's not straightforward, but it is very powerful. And yes, like I said, I mean, in terms of the total technology, but that's the challenge also, how to communicate it. And Palantir is not very good at that, even as of today.
John, your thoughts on Salesforce comparison?
So you know how I talk about things I can't talk about? I can't talk about Salesforce compared to anyone else, so I'm going to take this in a different direction. Here's 3 metrics for you. Data-driven organizations, ad nauseum over the past decade, 23 times more likely to add customers, 6.5 times more likely to retain those customers, 15 times more likely to deliver value that is noticeable by customers. But the reason I call those numbers out, and it's really important to understand, that the B2B model approach to the enterprise is that competition becomes less and less of a concern, because it takes time to ramp up and build an ecosystem. Salesforce is flat out one of the most amazing companies on earth. I could talk for years on what I know about Salesforce. I just can't. But what Palantir is doing is the same direction as Salesforce. They're building an ecosystem. But here's the thing that's really important to understand. They don't have to be the winner. They can be in the winner's circle. Every company that I work with owns 4, 5, 6 solutions in and around a data science, AI, machine learning solution. But oftentimes it's segmented by what Sachin just shared a minute ago. I do.
Sean, if you don't mind me interrupting there for a minute,
love it.
I would love you just to, if you could dive a little deeper on what a solution means, because as myself, I'm like, what does that mean? And I'm sure there's other people watching.
Yeah, for sure. So you know, you're Jeremy. You run Financial Education Corp. Okay. You've been delivering education to your clients for years, but you suddenly realized all of your competitors have moved to digital. They're delivering it online. They're delivering it via courses. They're delivering it via a model where instead of buying a book and a video and attending a class, maybe now they're saying, I want to log into financialeducationjeremy.com. I sign up for 1 month at a time. Well, now you need to shift gears as a leader of this company to a digital experience, which means I need to be able to take payments and self-serve. I need to be able to offer this live over the internet. I have to be able to scale and market to my customers. But this also means a whole new realm of competing in a digital space where you're bidding for ads. You now have to retain those customers. Before, you would sell them a book. They pay full price and they get the book. New book comes out, they got to buy a new book, right? New class comes out, got to buy a new class. In the SaaS model, this online model, this digital disruptive model, what happens is it's very, very expensive to get those customers, and you need them to stay as customers for a certain period of time. Maybe it's 6 months, maybe 7 months, whatever. So you have to start thinking about your customer acquisition cost. But then you have to think about, how do you retain those customers? Then you have to think about, do they have good NPS or customer satisfaction scores? Then you go back to the beginning and say, well, shoot, I need to make sure that I have really strong marketing and leads that are driving those opportunities. And those opportunities are being driven to close. So this means that you've got data coming from advertising. You've got data coming from your sales team and your CRM like Salesforce. You've got data coming from a service or a customer success organization that might sit in a totally different server. You might have customer satisfaction scores that sit on AWS somewhere. So what you now need is, you need a system or a tool or a solution that can help you to solve all these problems. And in a best case scenario, there will be a solution that exists that can aggregate on its own all of those different data sources into one cohesive layer. So think of it like this. I'm grabbing oranges, I'm grabbing apples, and I'm grabbing bananas. And it's like, well, these things aren't the same. I need a system that can not only recognize what those individual items are, but standardize them. Maybe it's a fruit salad. Maybe it's making them all look like apples, right? Once we have a unified understanding of data, we can start to push that up through our system towards our solution. That means gaining insights from it. That means delivering the insights into different applications. So one thing might be, how do I identify customers at risk of churning? How do I then identify my best possible customers to target for upsells or resells or discounts? It could be understanding which customers have a high chance of being a referral and targeting them with online advertising. So it's sort of like a stepped process to understand what data goes to where, how does it drive action. And I'll give you my final point on this topic. Everything I do, I think about in terms of driving an intelligent experience where we operationalize data at scale. The easiest way to think about this is that I want to grab the steering wheel of my company, and I want to be greeted by a diagnostic and descriptive understanding. What has happened? What is happening? That's the dashboard behind the steering wheel that we all have in our cars. More so than that, I want a predictive and prescriptive experience. That's your GPS. That's, where am I trying to get to? What's the best way to get there? What happens if I get off track? And what is the impact of getting on a different route going to do to me? So it's really that complete, cohesive understanding of what has happened, what is happening, what direction am I going, what happens if I shift, miss, or can't get back on track? How do I get to my endpoint, the endpoint, or any of those kind of questions? So in the enterprise software space, when we talk about a solution, it's solving for problems. I think Sachin has said this really well before, and I've heard Kris talk about it great from his space in healthcare. A solution could be a single point of like, I just need a tool to predict customer churn. Another solution might be, I need a tool to help me aggregate data into one place. Another tool could be grabbing all that data and pushing it up into an application. The beauty of tools like Palantir is they're saying, like, pump the brakes. We're going to do all of that. We're going to autonomously do it. We're going to make it easy to do it. We're going to build an ecosystem around it. We're going to solve for all of your problems. My final point here that I think is super important from an investment perspective, not just with Palantir, but with business-to-business tech in general within the enterprise software space, is there are going to be lots of winners. So for people who are thinking like, where should I put my time and money? How should I do my due diligence? I think what you'll find is many of these companies need, excuse me, allergies. Jeremy, you're bringing it out of me, man. A lot of companies have to go out there and understand that like different parts of our org need to interact with, gain data and gain insights from different solutions. So you might have someone who's writing stuff in Python or R. You might have someone who's leveraging Palantir at scale. You might have someone who's doing like an analytics as part of a native solution. So there's just a lot of different ways to think about it. But the beauty for all of us is, and I'll say it one more time and I'll be quiet, is they don't have to be the absolute winner. That's the beauty. This is a multi-trillion-dollar space spending out of their mind to keep up with data that will never stop and customers who will never stop demanding more from them. So with that, that's sort of my take on the enterprise solutioning and why it's okay to not necessarily be the sole winner. Because your point about competition, I love it. But hey, competition's great. Then we all get better, you know?